program is made possible by Friends of Iowa Public Television. And this broadcast of the Nightly Business Report is brought to you locally by the full-service investment firm of Piper Jaffray and its employees, with offices in Des Moines, Quad Cities, Waterloo, Sioux City, Mason City, and Storm Lake.
After dropping more than 100 points, the Dow makes a strong comeback, but still leaves many investors nervous. Good evening, I'm Paul Kangas in Miami.
And I'm Cassie Seifert in New York. Also coming up on NBR, it's down to the wire for Congress to vote on a compromise tax bill.
NBR is made possible by Digital Equipment Corporation, leveraging investments in information systems for today and tomorrow. People come to us for results. The $63 billion Franklin Group of Funds, helping 2 million investors reach their goals since 1947. Franklin funds are distributed nationwide by investment professionals. A.G. Edwards, member of the New York Stock Exchange, serving the investment needs of individuals and businesses through more than 400 offices nationwide. And is produced in association with Reuters, the world's largest electronic publisher, which provides NBR with news, market data, and communication services worldwide.
The ghost of October's past rattled its chains on Wall Street today as panicky investors pushed the Dow Jones Industrial Average to its lowest point of the year this morning. But the blue chips managed to make their way back from a more than 100-point deficit to close down 21.61 at 31.79 even. Scott Gervey is live at the New York Stock Exchange with more. Scott?
Cassie, this was one of those wild days on Wall Street. Computerized program trades were responsible for much of this morning's decline, and the controls put in place following the crash 5 years ago this month probably kept it from being much worse. For reasons only the computer jockeys know for sure, 3 massive sell programs hit almost at the opening bell. The market never had a chance. The Dow fell 30 points in the first 10 minutes of trading. That brought it well below a key support level at 31.80, and that triggered more program selling. Volume was heavy, and losers were running 8-1 over gainers. By 11:30, the Dow had lost more than 100 points and was below 3,100. But now the circuit breaker rules went into effect to discourage program trading. The market stabilized.
They're not going to stop the market from going down, but they will have a tempering, slowing effect. They give you a chance to catch your breath, which is what they were there for.
No specific event set off today's decline. There is continued disappointment that the Federal Reserve has not made another easing move in the wake of recently grim economic reports. And there is still uncertainty about the upcoming election. But traders are beginning to accept the possibility of a Clinton victory. There was a sell-off in overseas markets from Tokyo to London overnight, but few analysts saw this as the start of a bear market. And a turnaround through the afternoon brought the Dow back. Many were encouraged when they saw that the Dow was the only index to make a 52-week low.
We have the potential, by the way it's setting up, for a positive divergence. If it doesn't get any worse for the other averages, they should eventually bring the Dow back, and the Dow will have corrected like the other averages did in the first 6 months of this year, specifically the NASDAQ. And that would be a positive for the overall market.
A couple of footnotes. While the big declines seem to come most often in the month of October, October is actually only the 9th worst month for overall market performance. September is the worst. And finally, Cassie, for a while the mood here was so gloomy the contrarians came out and said it was a good time to buy. Looks like more than a few investors paid attention.
I hope they're back again tomorrow. Thanks, Scott. As Scott noted, the bears ran wild all over the globe today. The Financial Times 100 index posted its worst one-day drop of the year, plunging more than 103 points, or just over 4%. In Paris, the CAC 40 index also gave up 4% of its value, dropping more than 72 points. And in Germany, the mark continued its rally against world currencies, but the DAX lost about 53.5 points, or 3.6%. Tokyo avoided the later sell-offs, but still closed down about 1.25% for its 7th straight losing session.
Last Friday's 53 3/4 point closing loss on the Dow Industrial Average turned out to be just the fuse that would set off a salvo of selling by Wall Street's bombastic bears this morning. With investor confidence already shaken by those major sell-offs in London and Frankfurt, our market went into free fall as buyers ran for shelter, and then in a straight line decline, the Dow dropped just over 100 points, just under the 3,100 level by 11:30 a.m., and 1,400 stocks were down at that stage, a mere 150 higher. Volume was heavy. That 3,100 level finally attracted enough buying support to stop the market's free fall, and then a firming in the dollar and the bond market set the stage for an extremely impressive afternoon rally, which slashed the closing loss of the Dow to only 21.61 at 31.79 even. The high of the day, only 21.5 points. Well, we closed only 21.5 points below the best level and up 83.25 points from the low. So that was impressive. A lot of short covering late in the day as well. Look at that volume, 284.4 million shares, almost 100 million more than Friday. But down volume still swamped up volume better than 2 to 1. The transports down only 6.44. They were off 26 points at one stage. The utilities off nearly 3 points at one stage, down only 1.88 at the close. And the closing tick, a rather bullish plus 478. Standard & Poor's 500 down nearly 3 points. Mid-cap 400 down 1.5 points, about a 2.5 point drop on the 100. All those were substantially lower than that during the session, of course. Commodity Research Bureau December index actually gained 0.40. The New York Stock Exchange index off only 1 2/3 points. Value down about 3 1/10 points, and the Wilshire 5000 off about 33.5 points. With all the wild gyrations in the stock market today, the bond market played second fiddle, but it did move nicely higher early in the session when the Dow's 105-point tumble triggered flight to quality buying. But prices faded considerably later on after the blue chip staged that strong comeback. Tax-free and corporate issues ended the day with just 8th-point gains. Longer-term governments actually closed down about 1/4 point. Well, let's make that 1/8 of a point, down 5/32. That's the Shearson-Lehman Long Bond Index down 2.31. And Fed funds, ho-hum, didn't change much all day. It closed just where they did Friday at 3 1/8%. Later on, I'll show you where the action was on Wall Street today. Cassie?
Paul, the dollar ended moderately higher as rumors circulated that Germany might lower interest rates. The greenback gained almost 1 1/4 pfennigs against the mark, half a yen, and more than 1.5 cents against the pound. On the precious metals markets, gold rose $2.40 to $352 an ounce. Platinum and silver also ended higher. Despite gold's strength, some analysts caution that a solid rally will not develop until small investors return to the market.
Democratic presidential nominee Bill Clinton says today's stock market drop is part of a long-term trend of disquiet among investors over the country's poor economic performance. Clinton and running mate as Senator Al Gore made several stops in Central Florida today. The candidate continued to focus his attack of the president's economic policies, and he renewed his call for comprehensive health care reform.
We believe that this country cannot restore its economic health, reduce its deficit, invest money we need to invest until, at long last, we finally become the last advanced country in the world to control health care costs and provide basic health care to all Americans, and we have a plan to do that.
Meanwhile, President Bush took Governor Clinton to task today for not taking a firmer stand on the North American Free Trade Agreement. Clinton endorsed the treaty this weekend, but said it needs more safeguards for U.S. workers and the environment. Speaking in Delaware, the president accused his opponent of only saying what he thinks voters want to hear, and he warned that a Clinton White House would not solve the nation's economic problems.
With this kind of change, he said all you're going to have left in your pocket is a little change. We cannot let him do that to the American taxpayer. And so the bottom line is Bill Clinton is wrong for America. Let him straighten out Arkansas before he tries to be president of the United States.
Independent candidate Ross Perot campaigned via television today. He told a morning TV program that he cannot be a spoiler in the presidential race because the nation was already spoiled. He promises to offer his own diagnoses of the nation's economic problems in a program to be televised tomorrow night.
Congress is working late tonight trying to wrap up a 5-year, $27 billion tax package. Over the weekend, lawmakers stripped some of the most controversial tax increases from the bill, but it still may face a presidential veto. Darren Gersh reports from Washington.
The tax bill puts President Bush in a political bind. His campaign appearances are a drumbeat of derision about tax and spend Democrats, led by Bill Clinton.
The man goes all around the country saying, change, change, change. And with this kind of change, he said all you're going to have left in your pocket is a little change.
But the surefire veto bait, provisions limiting deductions and personal exemptions for upper-income taxpayers, were dropped over the weekend. So this morning, the president said he wasn't sure what he'd do.
The problem is they always send me something that has some of the things I want and then load it up with, in this instance, taxes. So I'll have to wait and see what final form it is in.
The tax breaks left in the bill this afternoon included 50 enterprise zones, deductible IRAs for a higher range of incomes, with early withdrawals for housing, education, or medical needs, passive loss deductions for real estate investors, investment and R&D tax credits, and repeal of the luxury tax on planes, boats, and other items. But here's the problem. Bill Clinton has already been attacking the revenue measures, mostly accounting changes for business. He says they qualify as tax hikes under the standards Mr. Bush used to attribute 128 to the governor. And unless you're buying a plane or a boat soon, analysts say don't get excited.
I mean, there's almost nothing you can do for a year or two under most of the provisions. And therefore, as far as near-term planning, it's a non-event.
This afternoon, Republican congressional staffers said they're assuming the president won't sign the bill, making this definitely a non-event. There isn't enough time for Congress to override a veto before it goes home to campaign, probably tomorrow. Darren Gersh, NBR, Washington.
The administration is facing the first override of a presidential veto tonight as Congress takes up the cable TV bill. Despite heavy lobbying by the White House, the Senate voted 74 to 25 to reject the president's veto. It's also unlikely the veto will be sustained in the House when it votes later tonight. The bill requires the government to establish reasonable rates for basic cable service in areas where one cable company has a monopoly.
U.S. automakers closed out the 1992 model year with mixed results as the weak economy kept many consumers out of the car showrooms. Among Detroit's big three car makers, only Ford posted higher car sales for the entire model year. But all three had sharply higher truck sales. During the last 10 days of September, Ford sales rose 2.6% from a year ago, but General Motors and Chrysler sales dipped slightly. And among other automakers, Nissan and Honda reported strong results, while Toyota saw its sales decline. And still ahead on our program, we begin a series of interviews from the Business Week Symposium of CEOs. Tonight we talk with Bert Roberts of MCI.
U.S. Air ground crews struck the financially troubled carrier today. Members of the Machinists Union set up picket lines at airports around the country after all-night talks failed to settle a contract dispute over wage concessions and work rules. The Flight Attendants Union ordered members to honor the strike, but pilots have been crossing picket lines, and that's allowed U.S. Air to continue about 60% of its flights.
We have to keep in mind that U.S. Air pilots have already made significant wage concessions, and I wouldn't be surprised if there were a certain level of resentment on the part of the pilots having already made concessions with respect to the refusal of the machinists to go along with the program.
Concessions that they're asking of the other groups are less than what they're asking for the machinists from the Machinists Union.
Analyst Buttrick says U.S. Air has lost more than $1 billion over the last 3 years. And Paul, he says the strike will cost the airline $8 to $9 million a day in revenues.
And U.S. Air stock was down 3/4 to close at 11 1/4, and some of the competitors' stocks were up. But the Dow Jones Industrial Average had one fantastic afternoon rally, coming back some 80 points to close down about 21 2/3 points, right at 31.79 even. Still, though, 415 issues lower, 1,506 higher at 1,506 lower. The advanced decline ratio, that was better than the morning when it was 17 to 1. Only 9 new highs for the year, 161 new lows. Topping the active list on 4 3/4 million shares. Merck down 1/4. It traded as low as 40.5, so nice comeback there. Home Depot traded as low as 49, and look where it closed, off only 1/8. IBM was up 3/8 of a point. It traded as low as 75.5. Telmex up 1.5. The Mexican market was up 65 points on the Bolsa Index, or 4.6%. Philip Morris, after trading at a low of 80, came back down only 3.5/8. Coca-Cola edged up an eighth. General Motors a quarter-point gain. Marriott was the biggest percentage gainer on the big board today, up 2 1/8. The company announced it's going to split into two separate firms, Marriott International and Host Marriott. I guess it's the more the Marriott there. But existing shareholders will get one share of each of the new companies. Chrysler up 1/4 point, and Glaxo Holdings dropped 3/8. American Telephone down only 1/8, although it traded as low as 40 3/4 during the morning sell-off. Consolidated Rail down 1 1/8. The rails were weak while the airlines were firm. Delta Air rising 1 3/4. Kellogg dropped 1 7/8. One of the problems with Kellogg is that it had a couple of downgradings. Dellison Lufkin, for example, cut earnings estimates. And McDonald's was down 1 full point. Newmont Gold rose 1 3/8. Golds were firm today. Joe Granville, the technical analyst, remember him, came out with the buy recommendations on a number of golds. McDonnell Douglas, one of the good percentage gainers today, up 3 1/4. First Boston repeated a speculative buy. Solomon Brothers said a good trading buy. Surgical Care Affiliates, which began trading on the big board last Friday, up 1 3/8. Shearson Lehman recommended selling Medical Care America to buy Surgical Care Affiliates. Terex Corporation down another 1 3/4 after dropping 1 1/4 Friday on a negative article from Business Week magazine. Company denies the allegations of sleight of hand accounting in that article. Marvel Entertainment down 3 1/8, subject of some negative comments in this week's Barron's Financial magazine. Nalco Chemical down 2 5/8. Merrill Lynch downgraded it to neutral and cut earnings estimates. And Sea Containers fell 1 1/8. The company said its third quarter earnings are going to be about the same as last year's $19.2 million in profits. NASDAQ trading a loss of 6.42. At one stage, that index was down about 20 points today. Big comeback there. Look at that volume. 223 3/4 million shares, way up from Friday's. About 7 stocks up for every 18 down. The 100 index ended with a loss of only 1.41. Microsoft top the active list, moving up 3 points on the day. It traded as low as 75 3/4. Amgen down 1/2. Intel up 1 1/8. Apple Computer dropped 1/4. Cisco down just 1/8. U.S. Healthcare up 1/8 along with Novell. Medco Containment, no change. Symed Life, however, down 3 1/8 points. Eli Lilly has resumed shipments of a competing catheter. And Synergen up 5/8 on the day. Providential Corporation up 3 full points. The SEC will not object to the inclusion of expected increases of home values during the life of a reverse mortgage. That's what that company does, reverse mortgages. Lifecore Biomedical, unbelievable drop. Look at that, down 10 3/4. Johnson & Johnson's Ethicon subsidiary tested Lifecore's product, which is supposed to reduce scar tissue, found that it wasn't very effective. And Symantec down 3 1/4 points. The company said it's going to have a second quarter loss on a 20% drop in revenues. That is 20% below street estimates. Over the American Exchange, a loss of 4.62. This index at one stage was off about 10 points. Trading volume up about 5 million shares from Friday's pace, about 2 stocks up for every 4 down. Kirby Corporation topped the active list with a 7/8 point loss on 550,000 shares. Porta Systems rebounding 2 1/2 points after tumbling 3 1/2 Friday when the company forecast a third quarter loss. And U.S. Filter down 1 3/8. Barron's Financial magazine had an article where the analyst called the company's stock price earnings rich and the company's finances just so-so. That is the Wall Street wrap-up. Cassie?
Paul, corporate leaders from around the country gathered in Washington last week for a Business Week magazine symposium on the CEO and the changing American agenda. We spoke with 4 of the participants, and we'll be presenting those interviews over the next few evenings. We begin with Bert Roberts of MCI Communications. Roberts told NBR's Rodney Ward that MCI is pursuing a 2-pronged strategy to increase its market share in the U.S. and to expand overseas.
Our ability to be a major global telecommunications company, certainly throughout this decade and by the end of the decade, is critical to our success in the future. We have attempted to push that strategy through working with partnerships, working with telephone companies in other countries, and trying to do things through alliances, as opposed to going in and building our own network and doing competitive types of endeavors country by country ourselves.
What's going to be the edge that MCI is going to be able to provide to really make a dent in the global marketplace?
I think there are 2 things. First of all, our technology and the extension of that technology into other countries, similar to the licensing arrangement we have had with Stentor in Canada, will be one edge. I think secondly is the fact that we will work with the foreign administrations, the foreign telephone companies as partners rather than be competitors.
Do we expect to see more announcements in the future like this?
I think you will see, and based on MCI's push in the global arena, yes, I think you will see more announcements in the future.
Anything specific you can tell us now?
Can't tell you now. There's too many balls in the air.
The FCC has also recently moved to open up the way for increased competition in the local phone service arena. Are there opportunities there, or what types of opportunities exist for MCI in that arena?
Right now, about 45 cents out of every dollar that we collect, we pay the local telephone company for access to their facilities. So the first obvious opportunity is that those costs are too high, they're inflated, and if they don't come down, MCI may be able to work with other competitors to get more attractive rates to serve our customers by buying access from other companies, hopefully at discounts and things that will be favorable to our own bottom line.
You're participating in a conference called the Changing American Agenda. Taking a look at where we are right now in the 90s, how would you define them so far?
We're behind the 8 ball a bit. I think that we've to some degree lost our focus on some of the important things that we need to look toward in the future, and I think that is a responsibility of business and government alike. I mean, please understand, from my point of view, and certainly MCI's point of view, we don't look at ourselves divorced from the issues. We have to be proactive, both as a company and as individuals, for making things happen right in the governmental process. And I think there are a number of forums, Business Roundtable, National Alliance of Businesses, and so on, that are focused on various aspects of trying to ensure that what goes on in government in terms of competitiveness in other areas is happening right.
How do we regain the kind of focus? What does it take to put the country back on the right track?
I think it takes, first of all, some focus in Washington at the federal level, that representatives that are sent here by the people are here to work on those kinds of problems rather than perhaps what has become a focus on themselves. I mean, our government doesn't run too well. We bounce checks. We do a lot of other things that maybe has said we've lost a little bit of sight as to what we ought to be doing.
Thank you.
Tomorrow we return to the Business Week Symposium for a conversation with Joseph Dion of McGraw-Hill.
Coming up.